Hey everybody, welcome to another Tanks replay. This one I'm in my T110E5 and I'm on Himmelsdorf. Now the T110E5 isn't quite as powerful as it once was, but it's still one of the best all-round heavy tanks in the game. When it was first introduced, it took Clan Wars by storm. It was pretty much the only thing people would bring. It made the already rare practice of bringing mediums, usually Fatons, quite uncommon. Because the T110E5 had mobility approaching that of a medium when compared to the other heavy tanks at tier 10 at least, a fantastically good gun handling, including on the move, and good armor. Now, you have to remember that when the T110 was first added to the game, guns were quite a bit less accurate. People were a lot less inclined to use gold. Even in Clan Wars, a lot of the less, shall we say, prestigious clans that didn't hold a lot of land couldn't afford to reimburse their members for gold rounds fired. The T110E5 was a very, very, very strong tank, and a lot of people had difficulty penning it from the front. And of course the sides and rear of it were weak, they always have been, always will be, but the frontal aspect of its armor was something rather serious. Now of course you look at an E5, and more often than not, you're not going to have too much trouble penning it unless you get an unlucky bounce on the cupola, which is mostly due to how the thing's shaped. You do sometimes get bad angles on it. Although other heavies have come which have since kind of relegated the T110E5 to balanced territory, probably the T57 being the biggest example, it's still one of the go-to tanks. If you just want a good solid tier 10 that you don't really have to think too much about when you're playing it, this is the tank for you. It does everything well. It doesn't really excel at anything. It's the ultimate in American tank design, at least in World of Tanks. And while it might not have the gun depression of the T29 and its derivatives, it does have a much squatter profile, a much smaller turret, it's much more mobile, but it's got the same sort of broad tracks that we're familiar with on higher tier American heavies, and even on higher tier American mediums. So, though it lacks side armor, it can to some degree side scrape, particularly if your enemies are hurling gold at you. Heat rounds do not react well to very wide tracks. To get back to the game at hand, we've pushed up onto the hill, but the enemy have a much larger force here. Normally, this is the kind of thing you'd look at and think, oh fuck, we've lost hill, I'm out of here. But we have an ace up our sleeve, which is that we have an E5 up here. I'm not afraid to get up close to these guys and bully them like I'm a medium. The enemy Artie seems not to be working the west side of the castle here. If he was, I would be missing a lot of hit points already. And the enemy tanks aren't firing up here from the northwest corner either, because they're already being engaged in their own position. Now, if you can engage the enemy tanks on the 3 line and prevent them from firing up at the hill, that gives you an enormous advantage, which I don't think enough people realise. And with the E5's good gun handling and high rate of fire, I'm able to track these guys and consistently damage them as they pull around the corner to try and get shots at myself and the T49. Not only that, but they're getting shot from our own tanks on the 3 line, which is providing a lot of help here. Unlucky bounce there on the E75, I just caught the back of his turret at a bad angle, but the T49 tracks the Eject 704 and I'm able to finish him, and now we've got plenty of cover here in the form of these 2 tank wrecks. I decide to go for the T30 first. He's a much bigger threat than the AMX 1390, and he is in my way, so I can't really shoot the E75 at the moment. Now the T30 is looking for shots between these wrecks, but I'm in a much better position to get them than he is. He's fired. My next shot goes at the E75, but unfortunately snags on the 704's gun barrel. T30's pulled around the corner, so I no longer have to worry about him. I can finish off the E75. The T30 goes down to our own E75, and after the AMX suicide, well, not suicide rams our T49 to death, I'm able to put a shell into him and give chase. Desperate noob, says the T-49. Well, actually, if I see a tank around me that's very low on hit points, I will ram it. I will go out of my way to ram it, no matter what I'm in. It's not the mark of a desperate noob, it's the mark of somebody doing something intelligent. I'm not going to say a good player, because the enemy AMX is not a good player, but he made the right choice there. It's the same thing I would have done. And he got away with it. I'm not going to go chasing a light tank and a heavy, even a mobile heavy. And our GWE is obviously capable of defending himself. The enemy Artie commits Sudoku, no doubt blowing himself up against one of the buildings. And this one is pretty much in the basket. Funnily enough, one of the last holdouts on the enemy team is the T-32, because he was actually using his turret to good effect. And most people know better than to bother shooting at a hold-down T-32. And unless you can see his hull, and I could at the start of the match, that's how I got my first shot into him, there's no point. If you can only see turret, the T-32 is very likely to bounce everything you throw at it. Make a quick, cheeky shot into the charioteer there. Our GWE actually moves up to shotgun him. My shot at the 1-2-1 misses, but doesn't really matter. I'm on the cap-out mission, so I've got to cap fast. Except, obviously, with only 2 enemy tanks left and not a lot of hit points between them, that's not going to happen. The enemy tanks are going to get killed. Charioteer does take our GWE down with him, and I think he manages to take one of these guys out as well. Or the 1-2-1 does. I think the 704 is the one that bites it. Nope, it's a bulldog. But in any case, these two are not going to last very long. I'm not going to get my cap out mission. Sucks for me, but at least I had a good game otherwise, and a good demonstration of the E5 at work. It does play kind of like a hybrid of a heavy or a medium. You can go to medium spots usually, and get away with it. You can also treat it like it's a heavy. It really comes down to what you feel like doing and what your team needs you to do. And that's what made it so popular in Clan Wars, and one of the reasons it's still a very, very well-loved tank by World Tanks players. It's just so versatile. It can do pretty much anything you need it to. It's easily one of the most flexible tanks in the game, certainly one of the most flexible tier 10s. Now, a funny point about the E5, actually a couple things about the E5, and may as well talk about the tank while I've got it here. The T110E5, as seen in World of Tanks, is actually a wargaming design, kind of riffing off the American T110 designs. The actual design for the T110E5 had a flat front plate, not in the sense that it's not angled, but in the sense that it's not curved. It's not a curved beak like the M103 and M48 Fatten have. It was a more traditional front plate. Now, for whatever reason, Wargaming have decided to change that. I think there were a couple other differences as well, most notably around the engine deck area, a couple other things. I think the Wargaming design is probably like 70 or 80% true to the original, but you can really see the sort of influence of the M103 and the Fatten brought in, and I think the reason why Wargaming did that, when they actually have the design papers for the T110, or at least Honeycutt's diagrams of it, is they probably looked at the existing American tanks and thought, what would the Americans do to adapt this thing for easier production? And I think that's a fairly good point, because if you look at a lot of tank designs throughout history, they change a lot between the paper designs and the actual tank. I mean, if you look at the VK3002M compared to a Panther OSV D, it gains several tons of weight and changes a bit. And similarly, if you look at a lot of other tanks, the entire shape of them may change. So I think what Wargaming have done pretty much is just look at the tank and think, how can we make this look like it was actually built? Because remember, now with the HD models coming in, a lot of these tanks, even if they were experimental or never actually built in metal, Wargaming are applying the kinds of wear and tear that you would expect to a tank in service. So they've got to maintain that visual consistency, which is a thing I will bitch about in games. Visual consistency is very important. It can really mess with a game if it's all over the place. The other thing I want to talk about with the E5 is the fact that when the E5 was first slated to be introduced to the game, everyone was still, quite happy with their Tier 10 heavy tank T30. That's right, the T30 Tier 9 tank destroyer used to be the Tier 10 heavy tank. And a lot of people looked at the T110E5 and thought, this is going to be a pile of shit. They thought it was going to be absolute garbage. They said, oh, no one will ever use this, it's pathetic, it's going to be underpowered, it's going to be absolutely worthless in clan wars, it's going to be unable to carry pub matches, so on and so forth. And look at it now. The tank totally took clan wars by storm, and it was in fact about 6 months before I saw the IS-7 and the IS-7 and the Mouse start to creep back into Clan Wars rosters. The E100 kind of was a mainstay of Clan Wars. The E100 and E5 complement each other quite well. But not only did it take over Clan Wars, but the E5 became a very, very popular pubbing tank. You don't see as many of them these days as people grind up the newer trees, but the E5s are still out there, and they're still a really capable force to be reckoned with. So, it's another case of the Waffenträger E100, I think, where probably most people realised how disgustingly overpowered it would be, but there was still a very vocal sect of people saying this is going to be garbage, no one's ever going to use this, you know, it's going to be trash. 20mm of not even armour really, just plate steel on the gun shield. Oh, Tier 1s can pen it. How useless. It's a minute reload, it'll get rushed by Tier 1s and killed. And then the Waffenträger E100 hit the test server, and then it hit the live server without any nerfs, and it was the most broken thing I've ever seen in my life. So, the pubby wisdom of the forums isn't always right, even when it's coming from the more respected members of the community and the big clans. You really have to get your hands on a tank before you can effectively judge how useful it's going to be, and it's like almost like another soft stat. It's not actually outlined anywhere in the tank's hard stats, but its versatility and how pleasant it is to drive, things like that, they're all little things that contribute to a great tank, and a lot of tanks have those that statistically shouldn't be that impressive. The Pershing is another example. The Pershing is probably one of the most loved tier 8s in the game. It is a fantastic tank. During the first week of owning it, I think I pulled like an 80% win rate on it, and I just could not believe how good the tank was. And this was back when I was really bad at the game, mind you. I was lucky to get, 55% on anything. It's just because it's such a flexible tank and so comfortable to drive. That's pretty much the name of the game with the American tech tree. And it's something you've got to kind of account for when you're trying to figure out whether a tank's going to be good or not. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. As ever, I'll see you on the next one.